on to today's Scaling with People podcast. I'm Gwenevere, your host and founder of Guide to HR. I'm excited to be talking about the different stages of growing your business. So going from building your business and having your first employee all the way up to thousands of employees and being an enterprise. There are stages that are involved, especially from a founder. So I'm really excited to have Scott Ritzheimer here with me to talk about what these stages are and dive into a little bit more about the earlier stages. Scott, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, it's so excited to be here. There's this moment at the start of every podcast where I just get like this anticipation because a podcast like this actually changed my life. Just totally changed the trajectory of my life. Led me down a path that allowed us to triple our bottom line in just 13 months, just over a year, and ultimately set me on the course for what I do today, helping founders and CEOs to scale their businesses with less stress. Because there's all the stuff that we hold on, but just what can we let go of so that we can really focus on, really, it boils down to about 2 or 3 things that you have to do at any given point in time, but they change over time.
Oh, I can't wait to dive into this. And I actually want to hear a little bit more about your journey, but maybe we'll save that till the end. So tell me, what are the stages that you consider to be the founder growth while the business is growing?
Yeah. So I a little bit of background. I've helped start around 20,000 organizations, many of them some of the fastest growing in both the nonprofit world and the for-profit world. Some I did myself, some I did as partnerships, and many I did supporting visionary leaders as they were jumping into the world of entrepreneurism. So I wish I could say I learned this pretty quickly, but it probably took about 19,999 to figure it out. But when you do something that often, folks who are watching this on video, like, this isn't physically possible. Guy looks like he's 18 years old. I'm not 18, I promise. It is possible. It did happen. And seeing it happen at this grand scale, seeing so many succeed, and quite frankly, seeing so many fail, you start to pick up patterns. It's just inevitable, right? And as I'm watching this go through, I'm seeing all these different stories, and I realize there's really only one story playing out again and again. And what separates those who succeed from those who fail or come up short or even stall out is that they either intuitively or by virtue of outside help, which is really important at several stages in the process, they recognize how they have to change. They recognize the next step in the story, right? The next chapter in the story, and they evolve through each of it. And so I started to kind of piece this together, both from my own story as a founder myself and from all these others, and realize there are 7 distinct stages that founders go through. Interestingly enough, there's stages that businesses and nonprofits go through, but for founders in particular, there are 7 distinct stages that they go through, from pre-launch to post-exit, right? The whole way through this. And what happens, and I'll use a story to just kind of set it up, why this is important. So let's imagine, if you're not a football fan, you'll still be able to follow me here on this, but we'll just use a quick football analogy because it gives us something visual to see, right?
Yeah.
One of the hardest things about the world of entrepreneurism is that so much of these stages are completely invisible. We don't know when they're changing. There's no one telling us necessarily that they're changing. There's just people telling us we should do this, we should do that, we should do the other. So let's imagine it's the big game. 4 seconds left. We're down by 4. We're on the 4-yard line. 4th down. All the 4s, right? We've got them all. Basically, if we get in, we win. If we don't get in, we lose. You have the perfect play. Call it. We've trained on it 1,000 times. The team can run it in their sleep, and everyone lines up. And you take your position. This time, it's on the sideline as the coach of the team. Right? It's the first time you're in this moment of it all being on the line, and you have to watch it play out. So play starts, defense gets tricked, everything's working perfectly, and you kind of pan over to the wide receiver who's supposed to be making this diving catch in the corner of the end zone, and they got the play wrong, right? They're blocking instead of running, and you realize without any hesitation, like the computation is instant, they're not going to make it on time. So what do? You book it down the sideline, right? Now, granted, you have to run 4 times as far as they do, and no one knows how this is possible, but somehow you defy all physics, right? The headset goes flying, your clipboard hits an assistant coach, you get to the end zone, you get both feet in, you make the diving catch like you've done 1,000 times over your career. But this time, instead of the roaring applause that you've gotten every other time, it's silence. Right? 80,000 people in a stadium and you could hear a pin drop. Everyone's just stunned. The only thing that's happening is these little yellow flags are flying in your direction, right? And men in black and white stripes are running at you. And so, though again, it's just a stunning feat of athleticism. Not only did you not secure the win for your team, you guaranteed your defeat. And so you're laying there on the ground, sore as all get out, right? Like, I should not have moved that fast. You're exhausted, you're sweating now, and you're thinking to yourself, why is this coaching thing so hard? Right? Like, why, we've lost, your team's embarrassed, some of your best players are thinking about leaving now, and it just feels so difficult, it feels so challenging, and it's confusing for everyone. Well, never has that happened in the history of professional championship games, right? Like it doesn't happen. It would be ludicrous if it did. Why? Because of the giant white line, right? And the referees who enforce that line. But I can tell you from working with founders, again, being one myself, I crossed that line so many times as a founder, and I see them do it every single day. We cross the line, we start taking on roles and responsibilities that are no longer ours, and then we wonder why our team's letting us down and we're exhausted and they're frustrated, and the whole thing's just way harder than it should be. By recognizing what stage we're in, we can understand what our role is now. It's not what our role was then, it's not even how we got to this role, and it's not what our role's going to be. By understanding what stage we're in now, we can really identify what the keys to success are for us today and actually let go of just about everything else.
I love that analogy. I totally saw that whole play out, and I actually would love to see that just in real life, just to see the reaction of a team. That would be just horrible and funny at the same time. I am a Patriot fan. Bill Belichick is no longer our coach, but like to see Bill Belichick run like that, like that's what I was envisioning when you said that. So hopefully I didn't lose the audience when I said my favorite team. But needless to say, I just, that's such a great analogy. So what are some of the ways that founders could actually like stop, you're going to have to stop and take a moment and look around. What are some key ways or key things that they should be doing to figure out what is the role that they're in right now, as you just described it?
Yeah. So a lot of folks come to me and they say, and you've probably heard some version of this, but I want my company, me, my leadership, my decision making, I want to take it to the next level.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I feel like we should have a bumper sticker for that.
Right? Like, what does that really mean? And when you really kind of drill into it, what it means is I want to do more of what I'm doing faster and better. And here's the problem with that is that actually might be the right thing if you're kind of dead smack in the middle of a stage. If you're right in the middle of the stage, you're doing all the right things and you just need to do them better, great. But what happens is there's a bit of a paradox in this at each of these transition points, and that is the better you are at one stage, right? The more you accelerate in your current stage, the harder it is to adopt the skill set of the next stage, right? If you're an unbelievable player, right? You're just awesome. And it's just like, put the ball in that guy's hands, put the ball in front of that lady, like just let them loose and they crush it. It is so hard for them to give the ball to someone else, right? You take a great captain on the field who's just reading everything in real time and you take them out of that mode, stick them on the sideline. They have a different perspective. They don't have the same feel for it. Their intuition almost seems like it breaks, right? Most captains don't become great coaches. Most coaches don't become great GMs. Most players don't become great captains. So what happens is that when we excel in one stage, it necessarily thrusts us into the next, but does not prepare us for the next stage. And so if we think that the next stage is just more of what we're doing, just kind of added on, that's a recipe for exhaustion and frustration. So the very first thing you have to recognize is if you want to get to the next level, you don't get there by doing more of what you're already doing. You get there by doing what you need to do in that level. And so just recognizing, very first thing out of the gate is recognizing that there are different stages, and you have to understand what stage you're in so that you can know what to do in that stage. It's the very first part. So a question you can ask yourself, one, you can find out what all the stages are. If we don't get to all of them in this episode, there's a book on it. It's free for everyone on our website. We can give them the URL a little bit later here. So don't worry, we'll show you, it tells you when you got into the stage, what to do in the stage. It's awesome. So know that we've got you covered on anything we don't cover here in the conversation. But because you have access to that, I just want to lay out an exercise you can do even without it. And that's to say, how did I get here? Right? What are the things that I needed to do to get here? Right? So for example, I needed to raise a bunch of capital. I needed to make a bunch of sales. I needed to do all the work because I was the only one who worked here. Right? I was also the janitor. I had to clean the trash. Just what were the things that you did to get here? And quite frankly, give yourself a pat on the back. The folks that I work with, a lot of the folks that are listening to this are very successful. I'm not saying that you're not successful. You can't reach these stages without being successful. So it's helpful to just take a moment and say, I did the right things, right? I got to this point. It's a little frustrating right now. We'll get to that in a second. I got to this by doing the right things. And it sounds a little silly, but it's actually really, really helpful to know, hey, you did this by doing the right things. Now the right things have changed. So then the second question is, are those things still as relevant as they were beforehand, right? Do I still need to take out the trash? No, you've got 25 employees working for you. Anyone can take out the trash, right? Do I still need to raise capital? Well, if you've done your full raise and now you're supported by revenue, not necessarily, right? Is that something you need to be spending your time on? Do you have to create relationships for the next phase of growth? Probably. Right? So there are some things that will stay, but there are a lot of things that just won't. And just by simply taking a look in the rearview mirror and saying what worked and why did it work, that's going to give you a big step forward into what's going to work in this next stage when you recognize that it's going to be different.
I love that. That is, I envision so many of the founders and leaders that I work with. Like that just is such a true statement. Question for you, though, a follow-up question for you is, what are these stages? We've been talking about stages, right? And I know that we're not going to be able to have enough time to dive into each one, but maybe just give us like a grandiose of what are the stages?
We've got 2 hours, right? No, I'm just kidding. So let's just go through these really, really quickly. At the very start, this is before you start, and it's what I call the dissatisfied employee. It's fascinating when you look at folks who ultimately go on to scale. They're not always employees, but there's this dissatisfaction in them that cannot be resolved by basically anything other than starting their own business or nonprofit. And so, again, we're not going to get into all the details of this, but there's this dissatisfaction. What you find is it's actually necessary because once you get into the game, it's really hard. And if you don't have a very strong, compelling reason to do it, if you're just doing it because you saw it on Instagram, you're not going to make it. So that dissatisfaction, it's uncomfortable, but we can actually use it to propel us forward and gives us just a significant boost. An illustration from my personal life that has nothing to do with work, but my wife and I were engaged long distance. We were actually intercontinental engagement for about 9 months. It was awful. Hated it. I hated every minute of it. We were terrible on the phone. It was just really bad. And a lot of folks talk about how hard the first year of marriage is. Well, the first year of marriage for us was bliss because our engagement was hell, right? It was so hard to be apart and all the paperwork we had to do for an international marriage. It was like moving continents. That season was so difficult for us, but it set us up for decades of joy in our relationship because we walked through that season well. So that's the key is you don't want to just try and skip through it. You got to walk through that season well. Once you get into the game, right, you go full time. This is what I'm going to do for a living. It's not a hobby or side hustle or anything like that. This is what I'm going to do for a living. You become a startup entrepreneur. Now, you and I know that that means you basically, put up a website and grab two pina coladas and sing Garth Brooks songs on the beach. Right?
I wish it
no,
was
not
that
at all,
easy.
right? And so we walk around with like the entrepreneur smile. It's kind of like, it's I don't know if it's wincing or grinning or smiling or something in between. It's like, how's it going? Great. It's like I'm dying, but it's awesome, and it is. It's kind of what's happening. It's glorious and it's horrible all at the same time. And so you catch me here in Georgia, we say, if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes, right?
Sure.
If you don't like the way you feel as an entrepreneur, wait about 5 minutes. It's just this roller coaster of emotion and success and setback. And most folks who do this right will experience about, over 2 to 5 years, somewhere in there, as much rejection during that period as most people will over 2 to 5 lifetimes, right? So really challenging, and it just forms something in our brain, right? Our ability to say yes and then make whatever we said yes to happen is like Herculean. It's completely irresponsible and impractical and 100% necessary. So you do that, you do it really well, you sell a ton, you raise a ton, you get a ton of stuff done. It's just like, it's hair on fire, all out, all the time.
I thought you were going to say it's like heroin, because I feel like we are addicts, right? Like there's a little bit of addiction to this drama that we bring to our lives.
Yes, 100%. And what you find is the folks who are okay, like they just thrive in that environment. And when you thrive in that environment, what happens? You start winning, right? You start bringing in more business, then there's more business than you can take on. You have to start hiring a team, and maybe it's a couple of VAs at first, and then it's just more and more. And you find yourself, you wake up one morning, right? There's a handful of people, maybe 10 at the most. You wake up one morning and you're thinking to yourself, what's wrong with these people? Right? Because you realize all these employees that you brought, they don't think like you, they don't act like you, they don't own like you. Not only that, you have to pay them, right? And so you have to sell 4 times as much as you did before, which means you're working more than ever, maybe getting paid less than ever. It's a really tough time. So someone comes to me, I just want to pause here for a second. Someone comes to me in stage 2, right? Startup entrepreneur, and they say, I want to get to the next level. No, you don't, right? The next level is not up and to the right. It's not more glorious and beautiful and wonderful. There are massive benefits to it, don't get me wrong. And it is a worthy endeavor. But if you don't think you're going to make it all the way through to where you're building a scalable organization, you might want to think twice about that. Most folks will make more money optimizing stage 2, right? Startup entrepreneur, get a couple people around you to help, and then just optimize, than they will ever make in stage 3. Because it's just a hard season. And I call it the reluctant manager, right? Because we learn, like, there's not a founder in the world who starts out an organization to manage people, right? If you've met one, let me know, because I've never met one. But we find that, like, that's what you have to do. That is the recipe for success in this stage, is selling some stuff and managing the rest. And that's a really tough skill set for folks. And it leads to this reluctance, this frustration, this kind of 1 step forward, 2 steps back, this push and pull. It's very uncomfortable for most founders. There's a couple of techniques on how to do that. The easiest one, the biggest one, is to make sure you get yourself a great number 2, right? Doesn't matter what their title is, but just someone you can count on to get stuff done and team up with you. And when you do, you start to grow again, right? You find there's a much greater management capacity with 2 people than just 1, and you're off to the races, right? You double-digit, triple-digit growth. And from the outside, it looks like everything's great. It looks like everything's wonderful. Like you're telling all your friends, we added $1 million this year. What were you last year? 10,000. You're like, what? And everyone thinks it's amazing. And there are moments that it is, right? And there are seasons that it is, but there's this kind of, like, there's this thing that's kind of brewing, and it's getting more and more frustrating. What you start seeing is that businesses get bigger, they don't get better, right? You start hitting some of those milestones, your first million, your first 10 million, your first $1 million month, your first $100 million. It doesn't matter what the number is, but there are these milestones that we put up that we think, hey, if I get there, this will all be okay. I'll have the resources I need to solve this problem. Here's a dirty secret of entrepreneurship. Your problems scale faster than your profits. Right? And so what happens is, and these are most of the folks that I work with, they're in this stage 4, and I call it the disillusioned leader. Because they're sitting there at their desk, right? Or they're hiding from their office and sitting at their desk at home. And they're thinking like, is this it? Like, this is so much work. And it's not even fun anymore, right? It's just hard. I'm dealing with people I feel more like a babysitter than a founder, right?
Welcome to HR.
I got into this to make coffee. I haven't been behind an espresso machine in 6 months. Like, it's just, we sit there thinking like, is this all it is cracked up to be? Right? Is this why I've made all these sacrifices over all these years to slug it out for another couple percentage points of profit that may or may not be there at the end of the year? And it's hard. There's people challenges. It's complex. We jump in and try to save the day, and it doesn't work anymore. So we feel out of control. And this stage 4 is a really, really tough stage for founders. And something you said as we were kind of getting ready for this episode is, a lot of founders feel alone. And I've found that is nowhere is that more true than in stage 4, because even if you have a team around you, there are very, very few people in your life who get why what you're feeling is so hard, right? Your team's thinking, hey, you're making more money than ever. Like, what's a problem, right? Or we hit these goals that we set. Why are you disappointed? Can you just stop coming up with all these ideas and let us execute on what we did before, right? Your family's thinking, hey, we want your attention again. Your friends are thinking, hey, why are you complaining? Like, you've got this awesome business. It looks amazing. And it's really, really difficult to connect with other people who really understand the significance of the challenges that you're facing. Stage 4 is the hardest of all the stages for founders. And so if you're there and you're feeling it, you're not alone, right? If you're there and you're struggling and you're wondering, what did I do wrong? Probably nothing, right? You probably did all the right things, and that's what led you to this stage. But the question is, now what do we do? Right? How do you lead? How do you flip that so that your profits start scaling faster than your problems, right? How do we start to turn this whole thing around? And to do that, we have to make the single biggest but most rewarding transition from one stage to the next over the whole course of a founder. And that is from stage 4, the disillusioned leader, to stage 5, the chief executive. And when you make that shift, first off, you're not a chief executive unless you have other executives, right? You can't be the chief one if there aren't any other there. So a lot of times what we see is the leaders that you've had around you, they're bumping up against a lid where they either need to step up, they need to kind of gain some of the skills of a highly effective executive, or you need to hire in other executives who can take you and your company to the next level. And that's really, really intimidating for a lot of founders, especially in the kind of depths of stage 4 when you're trying to break through all of that. And your leaders are your friends, right? They've got sweat equity in the business, like the godfather to your children. That's the real stuff that's happening for founders. It's business and personal. No, it is all together. And so this new skill set of finding executives, leading them well, making people decisions, not policy decisions, being a chief executive is really intimidating at first. But here's why it's worth it. Most founders I've met can really only survive 2, 3, maybe 5 years in stage 3 and stage 4, maybe even that combined, right? But the tenure of someone who really steps into that chief executive seat, who understands what that looks like and gives themselves to doing it effectively, is like 5, 10, 15, 50 years, right? What happens is the CEO role is a much better fit to the natural wiring of most founders. And so the fact that it's different isn't showing you that you don't know how to do it, or you can't do it, or you're not wired to do it. In fact, what's happened is you've developed all these skills and abilities that are further from what you're wired to do than the CEO one. The biggest step is just what you do, not your wiring. And so a lot of folks, the reason why I'm kind of belaboring this point is a lot of people get here and they think, is this as far as I can take my business? Right? And they start looking for a professional CEO. That's not inherently a bad choice, but it might be the wrong time to do that. If you've never stepped into the CEO seat, how do you know what a great CEO is supposed to do? How are you going to hold them accountable? And so stepping into that CEO seat is just it's borderline magical. When you talk to founders who've done it, right, versus founders who've never gotten it, it's like you're talking to two completely different people. And what it does, it sets the stage. I'll just go through these quickly. Stage 5 to stage 6 is a transition from CEO, where you're running the business full time, to true owner, where you can have somebody else run your business for you full time. Some really important ways of doing that. We talk about them in the book. Well, just for the sake of time, we'll leave that out. And doing that well sets the stage for the very last one, which is the visionary founder, right? When you look at the heart of most founders all the way back at stage 1, what they really want to do is make an impact and make a difference, right? They want to make great money doing it. And what happens is, if you follow all these steps, if you work each one of them the way that you're supposed to, and you get to that visionary founder, you've got the money that you need, right? Everything else is just gravy at that point. And what that means is that you get to focus almost exclusively on impact. And it's just absolutely stunning to see someone accomplish that.
That's amazing. And I was thinking about that when you were talking about a founder stepping into the CEO, or a founder who thinks they need to go out and find a CEO and bring that CEO in. One of the things I see on my side is culture related. People. Why are people at your business? They are at your business because of you, because of that CEO, right? Like, they're not, sorry, the founder. In the way where, like, people believe in what you are trying to accomplish, what you are building. And to write it off as like, oh, I've hit my limit, I should bring a CEO in, that's going to have such a massive impact, maybe to the business, but definitely to your people and your culture, because people are there for you. And so I love that idea, like really like stepping into that CEO landscape. And one last question before we start to wrap up. How is an entrepreneurial right for the CEO role? You said that sometimes it's like the best fit, it's that magical moment. What are some of the attributes or characteristics that you find make that statement so true?
Okay. It surprises most folks because it's completely separate from the conversation I hear about this in virtually every other environment. And it boils down to one thing. And it's why it's such a good fit for the vast majority of them once they understand what it is. And that is, do you have a compelling vision for the future of your organization? And are you willing to pursue it?
Oh, I love that.
That's
A
really what
great
it boils
quote.
down to. Because
Yeah,
if everyone that I've seen who says, yeah, I want to do that, but they don't have a compelling vision that requires it, never going to happen. You are not going to make the skill set change. You're not going to let go of what you have to let go of. You're not going to create the space for your executives to flourish. You're going to keep jumping on the field and saving the day. But if you have a compelling vision that demands that you step into that role for your organization to thrive and achieve the vision that you have, that's the requisite, right? As long as you have that and you're willing to do what it takes to get there, founders are unbelievably adaptive, right? They are, it's
absolutely.
stunning, right?
Yeah.
And so when we look at it as like, do you love meetings? Do you like, we talk about all this other stuff, and it's like, no, like, do you have to be in more meetings than you did before? Yeah. But if you have a really compelling vision, then you'll figure it out. Right? It's not a problem. So most of the time what's happening is not, do I need a professional CEO or not? Right. At least at stage 4, it's, am I building the business that I want? Right. Do I actually want to build something that scales? Or am I actually happy with what it is right now? And if I just stop pretending that it has to be something else, I can just enjoy it right now. Or have I built someone else's business and I really just want to go back to making coffee and being behind the machine and chatting with the folks who come in through the door? There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing better about building a $10 million business than a $1 million business. There's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. In fact, many times it's actually worse. And so when we can redefine that as saying, hey, what is the business or nonprofit that you're trying to build? And how do you have to show up to build that? It becomes so much simpler.
I love that. So wrapping up here, any last, I mean, I feel like there were so many great tidbits in there and so much great knowledge that you just shared, but any last words of wisdoms or tips or tricks that founders, as they're listening to this, thinking about what stage they're at and what do they want to do going forward? Any last words of wisdom?
Yeah. Again, I would say, so the URL where folks can get it is at scalearchitects.com/founders. Get a copy of the book and get the full book for free.
And we'll share it.
And it's gonna lay it all out. So it is the easy button, right? Most folks who take and implement it, feedback I've gotten from readers, they're saving on average about 10 hours a week in things that they don't have to do anymore. So simplest thing you could possibly do. Second thing, and this is just in case anyone thinks highly of me, let's just tear that down for a moment. We just had Mother's Day not too long ago, and I decided I was like, gonna super dad it, right? And it was like, my wife, go out, have some fun, like get your nails done or something like that. Like just go. I got all the kids. I'm gonna make dinner. Long story short, it was a disaster, right? Things were on fire in the kitchen. Kids were fighting. Like YouTube was playing like horror movie commercials on TV. My wife walks in after this supposedly relaxing time into just chaos, right? And she had warned me ahead of time. Don't get me wrong. She's like, I don't think that's a great idea. How about if we just go out to eat later? I was like, no, I got it, right, Mr. I can do it all. And so Mr. I can do it all is standing there sweating, kids everywhere. It was awful. And she's like, why don't we just go out to eat? And I finally had the humility to like recognize my current state. I was like, okay, we'll do that. And we had a wonderful time. Went out to eat. Everyone got what they wanted. It was not burnt to charcoal. And it hit me as we're sitting there around the table. My kids are having a great time. I don't have to be a great cook to be a great dad or husband, right?
So
I can leave that to the folks who can do it. I can trust the professionals to do that. And it doesn't detract from what I do. So many founders try to do it alone, right? There's this kind of badge of honor of doing it alone. And we're trying to be so good at so many things. We're trying to be so good at navigating all of these different stages, when all you really have to do is get a guide to help you show you the way, right? So my encouragement to you, don't try and be super CEO by yourself. Join me in not being super dad by myself, right? Just hire out the help that you need to really succeed at the very few things that you have to do.
Greatest wisdom ever. Well, thank you, Scott. I feel like we could talk the 2 full hours you were talking about, but we're going to wrap it up. And it was a joy speaking with you. And I hope the listeners also enjoyed the conversation. Thanks everyone for joining us. And we look forward for you joining us on the next episode.